Good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Street Peace Coalition on Chicago Comcast 21. My name is Minister Michael Muhammad, one of the co-founders of the Street Peace Coalition. I'm sitting in temporarily for our normal host who should be here to take over any second. And so until our host arrives, as you can see, we have a guest tonight who I'm going to allow our regular host to properly introduce in a few minutes. But for those of you who tune in to us on a weekly basis, we appreciate your viewership, and we hope that you will tell your friends, tell your loved ones, all those who are in Chicago who subscribe to Comcast cable television, to tune in to us on a weekly basis. We have a little time left on our season, and we want to keep bringing to you some of the grassroots violence prevention, intervention, street workers that are a part of our organization as we confront the issue of black-on-black violence and street violence in Chicago. And so I see our host, our regular host, Brother Johnny Cole Muhammad, has arrived. I'm going to ask you until he comes in. I want to put up the overhead. Why don't you check us out online?
Good evening. Forgive me for being late. I am glad to be here once again to talk about what's going on in our community, and I'm delighted to have Brother Noon here with us.
How you doing, brother? It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you, brother.
Yes, sir. Yes,
All right. So we really want to get into some discussion with the person who has a background that I think our audience would be very interested in, and he can share with us some wisdom and some insight in order to help us navigate out of some of these difficult situations that we find ourselves in our communities. And one of the things that we cannot do is overlook the wisdom that is contained in our people through brothers that have on-the-ground experience on how to deal with some of the challenges and some of the conflicts and some of the family and community issues that we confront every day. So I am certainly delighted to have our guest here. And what I'd like to do is to actually have you kind of give us a background about your life and where you grew up and some things about the challenges that you faced growing up, and if we could probably draw some lessons and make some connections with some people in our audience who've had similar experiences and how they dealt with those and how we can use those experiences and apply them to some of the conflict and the violence that we face in our community today. So I'm going to ask you to first of all kind of tell us who you are, and give us a snapshot of who you are and where you came from, brother.
Well, on the street, I'm known as either Noon or Dialobe.
Okay.
My preferred name is Dialobe Lumumba. I grew up on the west side of Chicago. In the area that I grew up, I'd say around the late 60s, there was an organization created called the Four Corner Hustlers. And I was a young member of that organization. So you know what comes with what we call today gangs.
Okay.
But we didn't consider ourselves a gang at the time. We considered ourselves just a street organization that was basically coming together to do things in the neighborhood. We played ball, we did all type of athletic things, and and things began to evolve. I would say in the 70s, early 70s, began to evolve into negative activity by some of the members of our organization.
Now, why don't we roll back a minute? What specific area are we talking about in terms of community areas? Is that Garfield Park?
We're talking about West Garfield Park.
West Garfield Park.
In the area
Okay.
from the 3900 from Madison to Congress.
Okay.
That was
Okay.
considered our territory,
All
and
right.
that is
All right.
where we began that. We spread out from there all
All right.
over.
And we should say that that area is one of the areas in Chicago where black people from the South migrated to.
Primarily, we come
they
here
came
from,
from there.
Arkansas. So,
Wow.
Yes, we came.
All
Our
right.
family came in the 50s. We moved over in that area.
All right. So we have
initially-
something in common, brother.
Yes,
my
sir.
my family come from Arkansas too.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm.
So we were part of that migration, and
All right.
at the time we came up here, you know, my older brothers were original Cobras.
Okay.
So that was my first introduction into the
Mhm.
street organizations. And, you know, growing up, seeing them interact, you know, and I was not a part of that. However, when I became of age and in the neighborhood, that, like I was saying, when I grew up in the organization, we was calling ourselves at one time Gladys Pimps. We was just young shorties.
Okay.
But at the time, around 67, 68, Walter Wheat came and started the Four Corner Hustlers, and I've been a Four Corner Hustler since then.
Okay. Okay.
In 1972, as a result of me being railroaded, framed and railroaded,
Hmm.
I was sentenced to 80 years in prison. Spent 26 of those years what I would consider being tortured, because under the conditions, first of all, I was there, it was torture, psychological torture, because I was being subjected to being held against my will for something I had absolutely nothing to do with.
Okay.
And as a result of me being in prison, I was subjected to assaults from inmates to staff. I acquired an education, college education. I have a couple of degrees.
Okay. Okay.
I accumulated certificates in various fields, welding and
All right.
construction and things of that nature, and grew into the leadership of the organization.
Okay.
It was something that was inherited, you know, not something that I asked for, not anything that I campaigned for, but as a result of that, now my efforts since then, since being out of prison, I was paroled with the grace of Allah, but since being out of prison, I have on many occasions tried to use my own experiences to deal with the issues that young brothers are coming up with today, because we were confronted with some of those same issues. However, we didn't have the drugs and things of that like that. But when it comes to the self-hate aspect of it, that's what I primarily focus on now, because it appears that for whatever reason, you know, we the only people that got children growing up with this self-hate attitude, you know.
You know, brother, it seemed as though from the timeline that you described, it sounds like you came along around a time where John Burge and the Chicago Police Department had all those very brutal and repressive tactics for rounding up black men and planting evidence on them, sticking them with false charges,
Yes, sir.
torturing them, and our audience may be aware of the fact that the City Council, I think a few years ago, passed a reparations bill in order to compensate many of those individuals who were wrongly accused and locked up because of the underhanded and illegal tactics of torture of John Burge. So it sounds like it was during that era when the police department was just kind of out of control.
They basically had their way. The way it happened with me was that they knew that I had nothing to do with the crime, but they told me, hey, if you don't say this, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put it on you. So they didn't implicate me as being a shooter, but I was implicated as being with the shooter. And as a result of that, I ended up getting 80 years in prison at the age of 15 years of
Age
age.
of 15 years old.
Yes.
Wow.
And I was subjected to, while in prison, subjected to all forms of what I consider physical, psychological torture, to the extent of being injected with psychotropic medications, quote unquote, from what the psychologist told me, because of the crime you committed. Therefore, I'm going to subject you to this medication. But I survived that also with the grace of Allah. I came out strong.
So were you sent to an adult prison at 15 years old?
Yes, sir. I was sent to Joliet
At 15?
at 15, and the guys that were in Joliet at 16, the guys that were in Joliet complained of the fact that I was in Joliet when I should not have been there, so they took me to the warden's office. And they told the warden, this guy not supposed to be here. So I say within like a couple of hours, they were shipping me to Sheridan. And Sheridan at the time had already become an adult prison. However, they had about 30 juveniles still there.
Mm-hmm.
So while we were in Sheridan, I spent approximately 18 months there. But while we were there, it was illegal to house juveniles in prisons, in state prisons with adults. However, we were housed in Sheridan with adults for over a year.
Mm.
And the adults encouraged us to take some type, we had so-called prison advocacy people coming down there seeing us, talking about they're going to do this and they're going to do that. But basically what they were trying to filter out was who they were going to let go to another juvenile prison or send to other adult prisons. So I was one of the so-called quote-unquote terrible 10 that was suggested to be transferred to an adult prison. Even though I was in an adult prison at that time, I was taken back to court, and that's a whole nother story. Mm-hmm. But I was taken back before this racist judge, Robert E. Cherry, who was a retired conservative state senator, and I was railroaded. I was what they call a public lynching. I was lynched to the extent of not being dead, but it was almost a death sentence considering the things that I went through while being held hostage.
So you started off at Joliet, then you went to Sheridan.
I went from Sheridan. I went to every prison they had in the state. What happened was that I went from Joliet. From Joliet, I went to Stateville. From Stateville, I went to Pontiac, to Menard. I was transferred. I was put on the thing they call the circuit because I was always outspoken in terms of my innocence. And back then in the prison, you had a lot of what we call racism, but we had, when I went to prison, fortunately for me, they had a thing called the LSD, Lord Stone's Disciples. Mm. So most of the organizations there were united, and that was a blessing because it basically helped lay the foundation for my nationalistic inclinations and beliefs, and made me sort of understand what we as a people are going through. And I had to look at things from a different perspective, psychologically, spiritually, physically, and that's where I'm at today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brother, when you really begin to study the conditions that we are living under and the kind of facilities and institutions that they have warehousing black men, most of whom are black men in these prisons, you begin to see that this is just an extension of the enslavement that our people have suffered for over 3 to 4 decades. And the prison industrial complex reinforces and underscores that lengthy history of oppression.
And to interject this here, I mean, they go to extremes. You often hear about how people are sent to prison, you know, for bogus convictions. But I'm the only person that I know of at that age was sent to the county jail. And while there was a judge by the name of Strayhorn. And he was my judge, but I was appointed a white public defender. He and this public defender couldn't get along. So what the public defender did was waited on Judge Strayhorn to go on a 2-week vacation and they went and took my case downtown to the Daly Center. And they put my case in front of a judge who never tried a criminal case a day in his life. And he was a retired state representative,
Wow.
okay? And he was a civic judge. He was dealing with marriage issues. And as a result of me being in front of him, I ended up in prison with 80 years, you know? And then they brought me back in front of him 2 years later to be transferred over as an adult. I was never in a juvenile facility, you know, for the whole 26 years I was there, you know. So, I mean, those type of games that they play with our life, but inshallah,
Yeah.
all is well.
So let's kind of pick up at a point in your life where you begin to make a transition.
Well, basically, that was when I got kidnapped off the street.
Okay.
I started primarily at that age. And, you know, being in the county jail, I was reading books. And back then, we only had one people, you know, certain brother. There was a brother by the name of Alfonso, I believe. He was with the Nation of Islam. And I believe that was him that would come down there. And as a result of not only me, but the brothers who were leaders above me at the time, older guys, they were very impressed with his teachings, which were, in fact, lessons from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Okay.
And as a result of that, in 1975, the organization of which I was a part of, the Vice Lords, they adopted literature. Our basic readings, literature was based around the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Okay, it brought us back to being us recognizing who we were and are as a people. We redrew the literature I'm talking about. It was a collective effort. It wasn't done by an individual. It was done by brothers who were leaders in various branches of the Vice Lord Nation. And we was trying to give brothers a direction, a positive direction in life. And the best way that we saw to do that was through the teachings that we had received from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But as a result of us doing that, they criminalized having literature. And they began to call it gang literature. And if you got caught with something, you can get anywhere from 30 days to 6 months to a year in isolation.
I mean, the more you talk, brother, the more it does sound like what we went through during slavery.
Yes, sir.
A black man or black person being caught reading a book or trying to get some extra degree of knowledge
Yes, sir.
was punished.
I mean, they even went to the extent, bro, excuse me for interrupting you, but they went to the extent of taking books out of the library
Wow.
that were dealing with, it had basically anything to do with the Nation of Islam. You know, it was basically prohibited. We had, at one point, you couldn't get literature or books or materials from the Nation or any other so-called quote-unquote black-oriented or black nationalist-oriented organizations. It was considered contraband.
Why don't we talk about, I mean, you clearly the literature and the exposure to the teachings and the knowledge had an impact on you. What kind of observation can you tell us about the impact of that kind of knowledge on the other individuals that you were incarcerated with?
It brought about a moral, see, back in the prison, when I first went to prison, homosexuality, drinking wine was a norm, considered a norm. Okay, you had people who was calling themselves, you know, leaders, who were leaders, you know, engaging in all type of activity that was immoral. So when we adopted the teachings, it became illegal for us to engage in any of those type of activities, and in particularly homosexuality, because that was being encouraged. You had wardens of those prisons, directors of those prisons, who were bringing homosexuals to certain prisons, giving them to certain leaders. Okay, we've had brothers get killed over these homosexuals. Okay, but they would bring them in, put them in the midst where they know that people would be fighting over them. Okay,
So you're talking about sex trafficking
That's basically what it
in the
was.
prison system.
And it was used on a regular basis.
Mm.
It was used to control.
Mm. Wow. Well, it seems as though we have a caller. Why don't we take this call? We are delighted to have you, caller. Go ahead with your question or your statement.
Yes, good afternoon. How are you?
Good, good. What is your name, sir?
My name is Floyd Davis.
All right. What is your
Good
comment?
afternoon. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great.
Listen, I was sitting there watching you and listening to your conversation there, and it's very illuminating. And at the same time, you know, you expressed that LSD coalition, and at the beginning of the show, the brother spoke of a group of brothers that have the wisdom and experience and capacity to make a great influence on our youth in the community, but they're being denied the resources. And as I listened to the congressman yesterday and other representatives speak of this 10, 20, 30 plan, but if you're not going to include a very vital part, which is the men, and who are the men that have the respect and have the listener, the ear of the youth based on their life experiences, then again, you're throwing money down a bottomless hole.
Okay.
You know, we've always used this litmus test in our community to say these are the ones we're going to deal with, or these are the ones we're not going to deal with. And, you know, it's not the preachers, it's not the politicians, it's not the PhD social workers that the youth are connecting with. So, you know, a very integral part of rebuilding our community is being inclusive and not exclusive. We have been in a pattern of paid and paying the professionals for well over 40 years to address issues that can be solved by the grassroots community. You know, it's like when you come in your house. You know, the house is all in disarray, and the paper's on the floor, and the clothes are over the couch. Well, you don't need a PhD to come in to tell you how to clean your house.
Yes.
You need professionals that are professionals in the sense of being members of a grassroots community.
Yes,
Members
brother.
of
Listen,
a community.
I couldn't agree with you more, brother.
Right.
Really, what he's trying to say is that we really need to have people who are connected to the black body. Most of our black leaders are trained in these institutions that don't have any relationship to the real experiences and the aspiration for liberation and empowerment in our communities. And we need to have those individuals like yourself who can relate to our young people, but also who have the passion to uplift them.
Yes, sir.
They must have that kind of commitment if we're actually going to create change and opportunities for forward progress in our neighborhoods. So yes, Carl, I really appreciate that call and making that point. But it really strikes me, brother, how you discuss the experiences in the prison and how those experiences work to really keep those individuals oppressed and looking for opportunities to prey upon each other rather than opportunities to rehabilitate and uplift one another.
And one thing I want to say is this here. Most people who live outside of our community, and I would say primarily those who are part of us but live outside our community, specifically talking about black middle class, they don't have a real knowledge of the interactions that goes on between these guys in the street and the police. The police are interacting with these brothers on a regular basis, okay, in a positive manner and a negative manner. And the negative aspect of it is what is causing lots of violence that continues to go on in our community, and we need to be aware of that.
Yes.
I mean, we need to know that it's not the gangbangers that's doing a lot of the
Well, see, that's
shootings.
the next conversation that we have to have. We have to turn to some of the wisdom that you can offer us that informs public policy, but also gives some direction to our young people on the ground about how to deal with these challenges that they face and how to come out of it on the right side and on the upside and really continue to salvage their lives and make some progress and change that will benefit themselves and their families. So we have come to the end of our program. We want to see you next week, same time, same station, Street Peace Coalition at
312-738-1060.
Thank you. Check us out on our Facebook page too, Facebook Street Peace Coalition. See you next week.